The last thing I remember clearly was the smell of mold and old paper clinging to the few boxes I still owned. That and the relentless hum of the fridge, empty. My landlord had given me until Friday. Friday, with barely enough money for instant noodles and a bus ticket to God knows where. That's when Alexander Vane walked in. Or rather, Alexander told me his name was just Alex then. Said he was a struggling artist. Cute, charming, a bit too sharp around the eyes for a struggling artist. He offered me a job, a way out. Not a job, really. A contract. A marriage. For money. A lot of money. Enough to make the landlord's deadlines and the medical bills for my mom vanish into thin air. I signed. Who wouldn't? What else was there for me? A week later, I was here. This place. Not a struggling artist's apartment, no. This was a sprawling, ancient mansion, tucked away somewhere deep in the New England countryside. Miles of winding road, then a gate that looked like it belonged to a medieval castle. Alex then became Alexander, the Alexander Vane, CEO of, well, everything, or so it seemed. He had a different smile now, more of a display. And the simple clothes were gone, replaced by bespoke suits that probably cost more than my entire life savings. My life savings, before the contract. After it, I was supposed to be rich. But here, in this house, cash didn't really mean much. You just had things, and you followed the rules. I was in my room, the master suite, they called it. Big, too big. Velvet drapes, antique furniture that probably cost more than my apartment building. I tried to make it mine. You know, just a little. I'd carefully arranged my few belongings, a couple of books, a framed photo of my mom smiling on a good day, and a small, delicate vase. I'd picked some wildflowers on the drive up before we got to the gate. A little splash of defiant color against all this grandeur. I put them on the small antique side table right next to the window, centered, perfectly balanced. It gave me a tiny bit of peace, seeing something familiar, something I'd chosen, in this museum. I stepped out for a minute, just down the hall to the bathroom. The mansion felt empty, even with staff, and I'd seen a few of them, mostly quiet, gliding figures in dark uniforms, always silent, always there, but not. When I came back, I noticed it. Not immediately, but it snagged at my brain, a tiny itch. The vase. It wasn't centered anymore. It had been moved. Just a fraction, maybe an inch, inch and a half, closer to the edge of the table. Like someone had nudged it, maybe cleaning. But no one was in here. And it was too precise to be an accident. It still stood upright, still perfectly balanced, but the balance I had set, it was gone. Just enough to let me know someone had been here, or something. I moved it back. It felt stupid, like I was playing a game with an invisible child. But I did it anyway, and I locked the door. For the first time, I felt the need. My skin crawled. That night was restless. The bed was too soft, the room too big. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift. I tried to calm myself, count sheep, remember the feeling of digging my toes into warm sand back home. Anything but this oppressive quiet. And then I heard it. A faint creak, somewhere far off. I assumed it was the house settling, old wood reacting to the night air. But it wasn't just one creak. It was a sequence. Creak, creak, pause, creak. Like footsteps, faint, deliberate, somewhere on the floor above me.
I closed my eyes, squeezed them shut. My heart started to beat a little faster, a drumming against my ribs. It stopped. Everything went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, where you can hear your own blood rushing. Just as I started to relax, telling myself it was nothing, just a weird old house, a breath of air, cold and damp, slithered in under the closed window. The curtains, thick and heavy velvet, barely stirred, but I felt it. A cold finger trailing across my ankle. I pulled my feet up, tucked them under the blankets, and tried to pretend I was asleep. The next day, the unease gnawed at me. Alexander was polite, charming, distant, but I barely saw him. The staff were like ghosts, anticipating my needs before I even knew them, but never speaking, unless spoken to. I felt like I was living in a gilded cage. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. I pulled out my phone, a lifeline from the old world. Sarah.
My best friend. She'd freak out if she knew I wasn't married to an impoverished artist, but a titan of industry. I thought about texting her, then decided I needed to hear her voice. Needed to hear a familiar giggle, a sarcastic remark, anything real. I dialed, and eventually she picked up. "Em, you finally called. What's going on? Are you okay? Where are you? This huge number flashed on my screen. Who even is this?" Her voice, bless her, was a torrent of normal. I tried to laugh, but it came out tight. "Sarah, it's me, Emily. Yeah, I'm okay. Or, I don't know. This place is insane. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it's isolated. And the rules? Everything's so formal. I feel like I'm being watched always. And the phone signal here, it's terrible actually. I can't seem to..." Suddenly, the picture on my phone froze. Sarah's face mid-sentence, mouth agape, pixelated. The colors distorted. "Sarah?" I said, holding the phone closer. "Can you hear me?" Then, her voice. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from the window. Clear, closer, and softer, almost like a lullaby. "Don't worry, Emily. You'll be fine. This is a great opportunity." The words, Sarah's words, but off. There was a subtle elongation of the last syllable, a strange lilt that wasn't Sarah's at all. It was too calming, too perfect. My hand dropped the phone, but it didn't hit the floor. It was still in my grasp, though I didn't remember tightening my fingers. My head whipped towards the window. The heavy velvet curtains were swaying, just a little, as if someone had just stepped away from them. And my phone screen? It was completely black. Dead. I stared at the black screen. The words from the window, Sarah's words, still echoed in my head. "Don't worry, Emily. You'll be fine. This is a great opportunity." Yeah, right. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning or the draft from last night. It was the absolute wrong thing for Sarah to say if she heard me describe being isolated. No, Sarah would have told me to pack my bags, to run, to FaceTime my mom and tell her everything. Her voice, distorted. Her message, too perfect. I forced myself to raise the phone again, tried to press the power button. Nothing. I tried to call her back, tried to call anyone. The screen stuttered, finally showing a message, "No service." In this huge, opulent house that had its own private fiber optic network, according to Alexander, no service. That had never happened before, not once. And I hadn't even mentioned Sarah to Alexander, or the staff, not a single word. That meant they knew. Someone was listening, all the time. My throat suddenly felt tight, dry as desert sand. Just then, Alexander appeared at the open doorway of my room. He leant against the frame, casual, almost playful. A smile, the one that used to charm me when he was Alex the artist, played on his lips. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "you look a little stressed. Why don't you send a message to Sarah? Maybe she'd like to come visit for a few days. I bet your family misses you." He pushed off the frame, the smile still in place, and turned, walking away down the hall without waiting for an answer. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. He knew. He knew her name. He knew I was thinking of her. He knew I felt stressed. He knew my family missed me. I hadn't told him anything. Nothing about Sarah, nothing about how I was feeling. Not to him, not to anyone in this house. This wasn't just bad signal or strange echoes. This was a trap. A cage with invisible bars, and I was already inside. I could feel the walls closing in, the air getting heavy. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he saw something on my phone. No, the phone was black, and I'd only tried to call after the voice. Maybe he heard me talking, but the phone was frozen. It defied logic, all of it. I needed to clear my head, to understand this place. I mean, it had to be just a big, weird house, right? With a CEO who was a bit controlling, that's all. I tucked the useless phone into my pocket. I wouldn't wait for Alexander or his creepy silent staff to guide me. I would find my own way around, find my own answers, I told myself. It was the only way I wouldn't go completely insane. I decided to start with the lower floors, away from my room, away from the eerie footsteps upstairs. I walked past grand sitting rooms, libraries filled with leather-bound books I doubted anyone ever read, and ballrooms big enough to host a small army. All spotless, all silent. Eventually, I found myself in a part of the mansion I hadn't seen yet. A long, narrow corridor stretching into the gloom. It stood in stark contrast to the rest of the brightly lit, opulent house. This one was dark, no light fixtures on the walls, just old, heavy wooden panels. My heart, which had just started to slow down, picked up its pace again. "Don't be stupid, Emily." I took out my phone. The screen was still black, but the flashlight function somehow worked. Odd, very odd. I flicked it on. The thin beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't light the corridor like it should have. Instead, the light seemed to get sucked in. Not reflected, but absorbed by the rough-hewn stone walls, by the ancient, dust-laden air. The space around me seemed to grow even darker, intensifying the shadows at the edges of the beam. A cold, damp chill seeped into my bones. Not the crisp, familiar cold of a New England autumn, but a deep, ancient cold that felt wrong, like being in a tomb. "Alexander?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the oppressive silence. It echoed, not down the corridor, but seemed to swirl back around me. Then a strange pressure. It wasn't a push, more like a gentle, invisible hand pressing against my back, guiding me. It didn't feel malicious, but utterly, unnervingly deliberate. My body turned slowly. My feet pivoted on the dusty flagstones. I found myself facing a door. It was made of dark, heavy oak, bolted shut, scarred and weathered, as if it hadn't been opened in centuries. The handle, a twisted piece of wrought iron, felt impossibly cold to the touch. I reached out,
my fingers trembling slightly, and brushed against it. And then it began to turn, slowly, unbidden, a soft, grating moan of ancient metal and wood. My breath hitched. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. The door creaked inward, just a crack at first, then wider. A sliver of absolute darkness, deeper than any shadow, opened before me. And from that abyssal blackness, a hand emerged, thin, pale, fingers impossibly long, like spider legs. It moved slowly, delicately, pushing the heavy oak door open a little more. A silent, terrifying invitation to step into the void. I gasped, a small, choked sound. My eyes were fixed on that hand, on the endless blackness beyond. A primal fear, cold and pure, seized me. I stumbled backwards, turned, and ran. My feet pounded on the stone, desperate, clumsy. I didn't look back. I just ran, blindly, until I found my room. I slammed the door shut, fumbled with the lock, clicked it into place. Then I pushed the heavy antique armchair in front of it. Stupid, useless gestures, but I did them anyway. My chest heaved. I pressed my back against the locked door, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, trying to catch my breath. My hands went to my face, covering my eyes, trying to erase the image of that hand, that darkness. When I lowered them, they were shaking uncontrollably. I looked around the room, desperately searching for something familiar, something safe. My eyes landed on the large, ornate mirror leaning against the far wall. I saw my reflection there, pale and terrified, still breathing hard. Then, for a terrifying second, my reflection didn't move with me. I blinked. My reflection blinked back. A beat later. I moved my head sharply. It lagged. And then I saw it. In the mirror, reflected on the wall behind my own shivering image, was a mark. A small, faint crack, almost invisible to the naked eye, shaped like a sharp, inverted V. It wasn't just a crack in the plaster. It was too perfect, too deliberate, like a scar. My mind reeled. I remember Alexander on the day I signed the contract. He'd rolled up his sleeve, showing me his wrist. There, etched onto his skin, was a similar symbol. A dark, intricate V, almost tribal in its design. He'd smiled, that new, hard smile, and said, "This is the veins mark, Emily. A promise that cannot be broken." The crack on my wall, that symbol, it was there, in my room. A promise, a terrifying, rungzerten promise. From Alexander, from the veins. And it was already marking its territory, already marking me. And I didn't even know what it meant for certain. But I felt it. I felt its chilling weight. This wasn't just a house. This was a nightmare.
And I was already trapped inside its monstrous promise. I pressed my back against the locked door, the heavy antique armchair I'd shoved there creaking under its own weight. My chest heaved. I just sat there on the floor, breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to get enough air. That hand, that darkness, and the vein mark on the wall.
It was all too much, too fast. My hands were shaking badly. I looked at them, then around my room, trying to find something that felt real, felt safe, anything. My eyes finally landed on the big, ornate mirror on the far wall. I saw my reflection there, pale, scared, still breathing like I'd just run a marathon. Then, for a split second, my reflection didn't move. I blinked. It blinked back, but a beat later. I shook my head hard, hard. My reflection lagged, just a little. And it was there. The mark. On the wall behind my reflection, a faint crack, almost not there, like a sharp, upside-down V. It wasn't a random crack, not with how it looked, how it stood out even in the rich wallpaper. It was too clean, too purposeful, like a scar carved into the plaster. My mind flashed back to Alexander, that day. He'd rolled up his sleeve, his wrist, a symbol. That same dark, intricate V, almost like a tribal tattoo. He'd smiled, that new, hard smile. This is the veins mark, Emily, a promise that cannot be broken. A promise? On my wall, in my room, and on Alexander's skin? What the hell did it mean? I didn't know, but I felt it, the weight of it, a chilling, heavy weight. This wasn't just some weird old house. This was a nightmare, and I was already caught, trapped inside its monstrous promise. The next few days were a blur of trying to act normal, trying to think, trying not to unravel. I avoided the long, dark corridor. I stayed in my suite, or the sunnier parts of the mansion. Alexander came and went, always polite, always with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The staff, silent as ever, continued their ghost-like work. They'd bring me food, arrange flowers, clean, and I'd smile, nod, pretend like nothing was wrong. I was trying to seem fine, to them, to Alexander, but inside, I was just spinning. I kept pushing it all back, the reflection glitch, the hand in the corridor, the voice on the phone, the mark. It had to be stress, right? Just stress. I really needed to rest. Too much had happened too fast. Moving here, the contract, Alexander's reveal, it was a lot. My mind was playing tricks. That's all. I repeated it to myself 100 times, hoping that if I said it enough, it would become true. One afternoon, I was trying to find some semblance of calm in the main library. It felt less watched in there somehow. Just rows and rows of old books, sunlight streaming through tall windows. I picked out a large, heavy book, something ancient about regional flora, and settled onto one of the oversized leather sofas. I just wanted to feel the weight of something real in my hands, something that smelled of old paper and dust, not whatever else lingered in this house. I placed the book on my chest, closed my eyes, just for a moment, tried to just breathe. And then I felt it, a subtle pressure, like the book had gotten heavier, not much, just a touch, as if an invisible hand had rested gently on top of it. I opened my eyes at once, my body tensing. The book was still there, exactly where I'd left it, not a shift, not a tremor. But that vague, added weight, it lingered. It was so small, so tiny. I could easily tell myself it was just my imagination. The way my breath was pressing on the book, or maybe the sofa was sinking slightly. Anything. But I felt it, and I knew it wasn't either of those things. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the book, my heart thumping a dull, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Later that day, I was in my room, trying another tactic to keep myself sane. My old tablet, my lifeline. I wanted to write down everything, all the strange things, all the details, get it out of my head, onto a screen. Maybe seeing it written would make sense, or at least prove I wasn't making it up. I typed, "I feel scared every time." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to write Alexander's name. I had to. He was at the center of all this. But then it happened. I tried to type Alexander. Alexandre. But the letters, they just wouldn't form. It was gibberish. A string of crazy symbols and numbers. A blur of nonsense.
Like the tablet itself was fighting me. I tried again. Backspace. Alexander. Again, the bizarre glyphs flashed across the screen. I tried lowercase, uppercase, nothing. Each time I pressed the A and flowed into the name, it corrupted immediately. I pressed the power button, hard, nothing. The screen just stayed on, mocking me with its nonsensical text. And then, almost perfectly timed with my rising frustration, a faint scratching sound came from behind the wall near my bed. Squeak, scritch, like something sharp was dragging along plaster, maybe wood. It was soft, so soft I almost didn't hear it over the blood pounding in my ears. But I did. It was there. I whirled around, my eyes scanning the wall, heart suddenly racing. Nothing. Just the elegant wallpaper. The silence that followed was heavy. I grabbed my tablet. The screen was still displaying the jumbled mess. I stared at it. "No, no, no," I mumbled, my voice a dry whisper. "This isn't happening." I needed to clear my head, to wash my face, to get away from that tablet, from that wall. I stumbled into the adjoining bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. My breath came in shallow, shaky bursts. I looked up, into the mirror. My reflection stared back, wet hair clinging to my temples, skin still too pale. I watched my own eyes, searching for something, some sign I wasn't losing it. Then my reflection smiled, a slow, gentle lift of the corners of its mouth. But I wasn't smiling. My face was a mask of fear and confusion. I didn't move. The reflection stayed there, smiling, staring at me. My heart hammered. And then the smile stretched. It kept stretching, wider and wider, grotesque and unnatural, until it wasn't a smile anymore. It was a sneer, a horrible, distorted smirk that made my stomach churn. The eyes in the mirror, my eyes, were burning, glinting with a coldness I didn't recognize. I gasped, recoiling, stumbling back against the marble counter. My reflection remained, frozen in that hideous sneer, its eyes locked onto mine. Fear, electric and freezing, surged through me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stared at that awful thing in the glass. Just then, Alexander walked into the bathroom. He stood in the doorway, casual, as if he'd just heard a noise and wandered in. His polished smile was back, the charming one. "Em, what's wrong?" he said, his voice smooth, concerned. "You look so tired, darling. Are you feeling well?"
I tried to speak, to point at the mirror, to scream about the reflection. I saw it, the mirror, my face, it smiled. The words came out choked, ragged, almost incoherent. My voice sounded weak, small. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate, gentle. He reached out, took my hand. His fingers were long and cool around mine. "You had another bad dream, didn't you?" he murmured, stroking the back of my hand with his thumb. "I told you, our old manor can sometimes make new residents feel a little isolated, a little lonely. It will pass, Emily. Just rest." He squeezed his hand gently, then let go and turned to leave, his steps making no sound on the tiled floor. He was gone before I could even formulate another protest, another attempt to make him see. I stood there, still trembling, my eyes darting between the empty doorway where he'd been and the mirror. The mirror was just a mirror now. My reflection, pale and scared, stared back. No smile, no sneer. Just me. I took a deep, shuddering breath. He'd seen me, he'd touched me, and he'd dismissed it all. Too easily, too calmly. I looked down at my hand, the one he had held. My skin felt warm there, a lingering warmth. And then I saw it. Just below my left wrist on the inside, a tiny mark, dark red, like wine, just a droplet. It hadn't been there before, not ever. I knew my body. I knew every mole, every freckle. This was new. It was a small blotch, shapeless, indistinct if you didn't look closely. But it gave me a chill, a deep, unsettling feeling. It was too placed, too deliberate, like something had etched itself onto my skin. I touched it. It felt warm, just like Alexander's touch had felt. It was real, a physical mark, a new one. And then Alexander's words from that very first day echoed in my head. "This is the veins mark, Emily, a promise that cannot be broken." His mark, a promise, on me, on him. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just dreams, it wasn't just stress. This was branding. Something was happening.
And it was happening to my body. I needed to know. I had to. I needed a real explanation, something that didn't involve Alexander's soothing lies. I spent the next hour walking around, trying to look casual, trying to find some corner of this vast house where I could feel safe or less watched. I gravitated towards the library again. The sunlight felt good. The smell of old paper felt comforting. I pretended to look for a book, my fingers tracing the spines of ancient tomes. And then it happened. As I ran my hand along a high shelf, my fingers brushed against a carved wooden panel that seemed just a little loose. Behind it, a dark, narrow gap. And from that gap, not a book, but something small, heavy, wrapped in faded cloth, tumbled out. It hit my foot with a soft thud. My heart jumped into my throat. I bent down, my hands trembling a little as I unwrapped the cloth. It was a diary. Old, no title, no author. Just a plain, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. My curiosity, a desperate, clawing thing, overwhelmed my fear. I had to know. I had to. I sat down, hidden away in a deep armchair, and opened it. The handwriting was faint, spidery, old-fashioned. And the words,
They were fragmented, disjointed, but they were enough. The ritual, one page read. The transformation. My breath hitched. I flipped through, scanning for names, for context. And then I saw them. Names: Mary, Eleanor, Catherine. And next to their names, always drawings. Faint sketches of symbols. Symbols that looked like the vein mark. And then, under Mary's name, a description of a dream. A rose garden, white roses, marks, a woman in a white wedding dress. My blood ran cold, again. It was the dream, my recurring nightmare. Another page talked about the contract, the oath. It was all there. Bits and pieces, whispered fears and frantic observations. The scratch marks on the walls, the strange noises, the feeling of being watched all the time, the mirrors, the marks appearing on skin. Everything, almost everything I'd experienced. And as I read these words, words that seemed ripped from my own mind, Alexander's voice, clear and sharp, cut through the quiet of the house. "Emily," he called from somewhere downstairs. His voice was warm, inviting, but underneath it, I heard it. A razor-thin edge of something else. Something cold, something demanding. Immediately, a chill, not from the open window, shot down my spine. It felt like a cold breath on the back of my neck. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I looked down at the diary in my hands. It was freezing, not just cool, but icy cold, as if it had been stored in a freezer. It pulsed with a vague, unpleasant coldness against my palms. Panic flared, sharp and sickening. He knew, he must. How could he not? Alexander could not be this perceptive. He wouldn't just coincidentally call my name at this exact moment. Someone, something, was telling him. Or rather, they were telling each other. I slammed the diary shut, my hands still shaking with the cold of it. My eyes darted to the door. I had to hide this, fast. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't let him find it. I couldn't let him know I knew. I shoved the diary, still wrapped in its faded cloth, deep under the mattress of my bed. I smoothed the sheets, trying to make it look like nothing was amiss. I had to pretend, to smile, to agree. But inside, I was already twisting the knife. I would find out more. I wouldn't stop. I had to. Later, lying in bed, the faint chill from the diary still seemed to emanate from beneath my mattress. I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumbled fragments of the diary, the horrifying connections. But instead, my mind was seized by something else. The contract. The one I had signed. Every word, every clause burned itself onto the inside of my eyelids. Not in ink, but in something dark, something that looked like dried blood. The terms, originally about money and assets, began to shift. The word financial warped, twisting into slavery. Marriage, once a simple concept, became sacrifice. Lifelong morphed into immortal. Each transformation sent a fresh wave of dread through me. And then the final clause, the one about the duties of the wife. It faded, pixelated, then reformed into something else. A grotesque drawing. A symbol of a multi-tentacled entity.
Black and writhing, its tendrils wrapped around a struggling human figure, slowly consuming it. I gasped, my eyes flying open. A sharp, burning pain flared on my left index finger. I lifted it, my hand shaking. The tip of my finger, it wasn't right. It was subtly deformed. Not broken, not blistered, but wrong. The delicate whorls of my fingerprint had paled, almost vanished. In their place, blue veins, thin and gnarled, had risen to the surface. They pulsed with a faint greenish hue, writhing just beneath the skin like tiny worms. I reached out with my other hand, my thumb tracing the altered skin. It felt cold, like touching stone with a rough, unnatural texture. Not soft, yielding flesh. It was changing. It was really happening, and it was starting with my hands. I had to get away, to distract myself. My throat felt parched, dry. I needed water, anything. I pushed myself up, slowly, trying to think, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. I went downstairs, drawn by the faint sounds of the kitchen. Maybe a quick glass of water, something familiar. I walked into the large, empty kitchen. The large, old-fashioned sinks gleamed under the soft lighting. A woman stood with her back to me, washing dishes. Her movements were slow, methodical. She had long, shiny hair, the color of tarnished silver, falling down her back. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Could I just get a glass of water?" She didn't answer, didn't even flinch, just kept washing. My skin crawled. I took a step closer. "Hello?" I tried again, a little louder. Slowly, deliberately, she turned. And I stifled a scream. My breath caught, lodged in my throat. It wasn't the usual young maid I'd seen around the kitchen. This woman, she was old. Her face, pallid and drawn, was covered in wrinkles, but her eyes were completely, utterly black, like two holes punched into her skull. And her hair wasn't tarnished silver. It was completely white, a stark, unnatural white, so long it almost touched the floor. But it was her neck that made me freeze. There, on her pale, leathery skin, was a large mark, a birthmark, dark red, almost purple. It was exactly, terrifyingly, the same grotesque symbol I had just seen in my mind's eye. The multi-tentacled entity, the one that was devouring a human figure. A bride, an old bride, here, working in the kitchen. Her black eyes stared at me. She didn't answer. Couldn't speak, perhaps. She just nodded her head, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then, from her lips, came a sound. She began to sing. An old lullaby. Its melody hauntingly beautiful, sweet and familiar, in a way that made my chest ache. But the words were not those of a sweet lullaby. They were low, guttural, chants, incantations, the very same demonic phrases, the same ancient names, the same terrifying words I had just read in the diary. She kept singing, her black eyes fixed on me, her pale lips forming those ancient, terrible sounds. And I knew my fate. I knew I was already lost. The cold from the diary still clung to my palms, even after I'd hidden it. The maid's song, those black, hollow eyes, and the mark on her neck, it was all real. My finger, the way it had changed,
The cold, rough skin. There was no going back. No more pretending. Alexander's soothing lies, his gentle touches, they were just a part of it, a stage. And I was the central character in a play I hadn't agreed to. I couldn't stay. I just couldn't. My mind raced, frantic, searching for an exit, any exit. I found myself back in the main receiving room, the one with the huge, overstuffed sofas and the unsettling tapestries. My eyes landed on a small, ornate table by the farthest wall. There was a silver-framed photograph there, one I hadn't really paid attention to before. It was an old wedding picture. Alexander, younger, but unmistakably him, stood next to a woman in a white gown. She was beautiful, in a stiff, remote sort of way. I remembered Alexander mentioning her once, early on. "My first wife," he'd said, a shadow crossing his face. He'd sounded sad, almost. But looking at the photo now, another detail snagged my attention, pulling at the thread of my sanity. Her smile. It was wide, too wide, almost like a cut across her face rather than a natural expression. And her eyes, they held no joy, just a deep, unsettling emptiness, like two dark pools, not the eyes of a happy bride.
Not the eyes of someone who just passed away. Her gaze seemed to pierce through the century-old photograph, reaching out to me. Empty. A chill, a deep, bone-aching cold settled into my chest. This was it then, a pattern, a terrifying, unbreakable cycle. She wasn't sick. She was like that maid, like me. That thought, that terrifying realization, galvanized me. For days, or maybe it was only hours, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything was muted, distant. The whispers from the walls, they were louder now, constant. A low, dry murmur, like sand shifting in a tomb. I couldn't make out the words, not really, but I felt their weight, their intent. Bloodline, I thought, continuation, and always the oath. They weren't just in my head anymore. They were around me, pressing in. I needed proof, for myself if no one else. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. Again, I thought of my phone, that old flip phone. I'd used it a few days ago, right? Before it broke. This time, I didn't want to call out. I just wanted to record. I found it, or what was left of it, in my room. A small, working piece, oddly enough. I pressed record. I held it up, pointed it at the wall, near my bed, where the scratching had been. I stood there, for a long time, just listening to the dry, rustling sounds, the murmuring. "Record this," I whispered to myself, my voice thin and reedy. "Record the truth." I pressed stop. My hands trembled as I hit play. I expected to hear the faint, horrifying whispers, the sounds of something ancient, but nothing, just static at first. And then a voice, Alexander's voice, warm, familiar, too close. "It's time for your meal, my dear Emily." It wasn't flat, it sounded normal, but it wasn't coming from Alexander. He wasn't in the room. This voice, his voice, was coming directly from the tiny speaker of the old phone in my hand. It was clear, precise. He wasn't here, but his voice was, coming from a recording I never made. Then, just as the chilling realization truly sunk in,
The door to my suite opened. Alexander stood there, framed in the doorway, a calm smile on his face. He simply watched me, the old phone still clutched in my hand. My own recorded words of, "It's time for your meal, my dear Emily," echoing in the silence. His actual voice now. The phone still played his recorded words. He hadn't said anything. His smile, it was subtle, hidden, but I saw it. He knew. He always knew. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. That was it. No more trying to rationalize, no more denying. This was real, and I was truly trapped. I had to get out. This was a place where nothing made sense, where my own sanity was crumbling, and where Alexander, he was everywhere. I remembered then the real desperation. I threw the phone hard against the marble floor again. It shattered into a dozen pieces, the tiny speaker finally going silent. The silence afterward was deafening. Alexander stepped into the room, his eyes sweeping over the shattered fragments of the phone. That smile again, stretched across his face, a little too wide. It made his eyes look distant. What are you doing, my dear Emily?" His voice was smooth as ever, but there was an edge to it now, a sharpness. He bent down with an almost exaggerated slowness to pick up a piece. He twirled it between his long, pale fingers. "No one," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried perfectly across the room, "can hear the cry of a grain of sand in this vast desert." At that exact moment, a sharp, twisting pain shot through my right hand. Not a normal pain. It felt deep, like something was being twisted, pulled from the inside out. I looked down, my eyes wide with terror. My hand, my right hand, the one I'd thrown the phone with, was changing. Slowly, insidiously. The skin was taking on a sickly blue-gray tint, like old marble. And the joints, they weren't just aching, they were stretching, elongating. My fingers, already thin, now seemed to be reaching, growing, curving in ways that no normal human bone should. The knuckles were protruding, sharp little knobs under the dying skin. A network of green veins, thick and pulsating, erupted just beneath the surface, crawling like a nest of worms. It felt cold, so cold, like solid rock, yet it was moving. It was alive. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the transformation continued.
I tried to pull my hand back, to hide it, but it felt alien, not mine. My own body was betraying me, just like the maid, just like the vision of the contract. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat, bumping into the vanity table. The cold, lifeless mirror on the wall offered a reflection of my horrified face, and then, slowly, my misshapen hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. I lunged forward, a desperate, instinctual surge of defiance, aiming for Alexander, for the source of it all. I needed to scratch, to tear, to make him understand what he was doing. But my body, it just wouldn't obey. It was like fighting against a current, a powerful, unseen force that pulled me in another direction. My legs, my arms, they moved with a will that wasn't my own. I wanted to resist, but I felt a numb, heavy compulsion, like an invisible hand was pushing me, steering me. My feet moved, one step, then another, not towards Alexander, not away from him, but I felt myself being drawn towards the door, towards him. It was horrifying. My mind was screaming, but my body was walking. My own will, my own mind, my own screams, they seemed to be melting away, replaced by a cold, quiet instruction, a command to follow. Alexander simply watched. His wide smile was still there, a thin, almost invisible film of emotion stretched over something else. He didn't stop me. He didn't need to. He simply turned, moving towards the doorway, a silent invitation, and I found myself, against every fiber of my being, following him. My feet moved, one after the other, out of the room, into the hall. The fragments of my old phone, my last link to a normal life, lay scattered on the floor behind me, forgotten. He led me through winding corridors I hadn't seen before, deeper into the mansion, away from the sunlight and the parts that had felt almost normal. The air grew heavy, thick with a strange, sweet scent, like dead flowers and old earth. We stopped in front of a heavy oak door, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. I recognized some of the patterns. They were similar to the mark on Alexander's wrist, similar to the mark on my wall, similar to the terrible tentacular entity I'd seen in my mind's eye, the one on the maid's neck, the one now beginning to bloom on my own skin. Alexander pushed the door open. A blast of cold, dry air hit me. The room beyond was dark, cavernous, but I could see vaguely the forms within it, figures, moving in the shadows. "It's time," Alexander said, his voice just a breath against my ear. His hand, cold and slight, reached out, not to grab me, not to push. He simply rested a small silk-wrapped package in my still transforming right hand. My fingers, the two long ones with the green veins, uncurled, seemingly on their own, to receive it. I looked down. It was a dress, white, silky, a wedding dress. I looked up at Alexander. His smile was wider now, pulling at his cheekbones. It looked almost forced. His eyes, though, they were getting darker, deeper, like two wells of shadow. He pointed to a large, full-length mirror positioned against the far wall of the new dark room. "Look, Emily," he prompted, his voice flat. And I did. I saw my reflection, but it wasn't quite me anymore. My eyes, they were a deeper shade of brown, almost black, just like his. And my smile, it had begun to stretch, just a little. A subtle pulling at the corners of my mouth, echoing the woman in the old photograph. My hands, both of them now, were pale, translucent, the green veins snaking visibly beneath the surface. My fingers were long, too long. Then, just as I was trying to process this new me, something shifted in the mirror. Alexander appeared behind me, in the reflection, but he wasn't alone. He was holding the hand of her, the woman from the old wedding photo. She stood beside him, her wide-cut smile frozen, her empty eyes staring out at me. Alexander, in the mirror, his reflected self, held her hand, not mine. They looked ancient,
like two statues carved from cold rock, their faces alike in that strange, stretched, empty way. Alexander, the real one, who stood behind me, whispered against my hair, "Continuity is eternal, Emily." His breath was not warm. It was like a wisp of frost. A heavy, sickening feeling settled in me. The realization was a dull thud. My reflection, the smiling Alexander, the other woman, all of it. This was my fate. This was the endless chain.
I was just the next link. There was no escape. Not truly. He reached around my neck, his cold fingers brushing my skin. A chill spread. He fastened a silver necklace around my throat. It felt heavy, like a collar. The touch was icy, sending shivers down my spine. The mark on my neck, the one that had appeared faintly, the tentacled entity, it pulsed. A low, dull ache, then a burning sensation. I touched it, gently, through the thin fabric of my nightgown. It felt raised now, darker, almost black-purple against my skin. It was real, etched onto me now, for good. I tried to pull at the necklace, a last desperate act of defiance, but it wouldn't move. It was fixed, forever, like the mark, like me. I turned back to Alexander. His smile was still there, fixed, but something had peeled away from it. The layer of charming warmth, of concern, was gone. Underneath was that same emptiness I'd seen in the photograph. His gaze was distant, cold, like the stone statues in the temple-like room. He wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was a vessel, a shell, an ancient thing wearing Alexander's skin. And I was becoming one too. That was the implication. That was the dreadful truth. I would become like him, like them. Then he took my hand, my altered hand, my almost inhuman hand, and led me, not through another door, but through an opening that materialized in the stone wall itself, as if the very mansion was reshaping itself around us. We descended, down, down, into the earth. The air grew heavier, thicker, the sweet, cloying smell of old flowers replaced by something metallic and earthy, damp, like a freshly dug grave. The sounds of our footsteps, if they were even our footsteps, were muffled. The whispers, however, were clearer here. A chorus now, not just from the walls, but from everywhere. Murmuring, chanting, words I still could not understand, but whose meaning I felt deep in my bones. We came into a vast room. Not a room, really. It felt like a cavern, primitive, ancient. The air hummed with a low, vibrating sound, a deep resonance that settled into my teeth. Grotesque statues, carved from what looked like dried mud and bone, lined the walls, their forms distorted, multi-limbed, bearing the same mark that now branded my neck, my wrist, my dreams. Candles, thick and black, flickered on pedestals, casting long, dancing shadows that made the figures seem to writhe. In the center, a huge slab of dark, uneven stone, an altar. Alexander, still holding my hand, pulled me forward. My legs obeyed without conscious thought.
I felt myself being lifted gently onto the cold, hard surface of the stone altar. It was rough against my bare skin. My head lolled back. I saw the figures in the shadows more clearly now. Servants, the maids, the butler, all of them. Their eyes were black, deep pools of nothingness, and their smiles wide, wide, like Alexander's, like the woman in the photograph. They began to chant, their voices, once human, now raspy, guttural, a chorus of dry whispers, ancient words, the same words from the diary, the same words that maid sang, the words of the oath. A searing pain, hot and electric, erupted in my chest, then spread. Through my limbs, through my face. My blood felt like it was boiling, my skin stretching, tightening. All over my body, the green veins began to rise, pulsing, thick and rising. My face convulsed, the muscles twisting, pulling, molding. I felt my jaw ache, my mouth open. My eyes felt like they were sinking, deepening, becoming black. Alexander stood before the altar, watching me. He was smiling, a deep, deep smile, filled with something I now knew was not joy, not pleasure, but an ancient, vast satisfaction. He raised his hands slowly and began to read aloud. His voice, once smooth, was now a resonant hum, like the very walls of the cavern. He recited a final string of words, the sounds echoing, reverberating through my very bones. My body jerked violently, uncontrollably. A final, agonizing tremor. I looked at my hands. Both were now fully transformed. The fingers impossibly long. The skin a pale, stone color. The green veins a map of horror. My fingernails, once neatly manicured, had elongated, sharpening into black, glossy talons. I tried to scream, to release the terror, the pain, the absolute horror of what was happening to me, but no scream came out, only a raw, dry sound, a hiss, like a reptile. It came from my own throat.
Alexander lowered his hands, his smile still fixed. He looked at me, really looked at me, and spoke, his voice now calm again, almost pleasant. "Welcome to the Vane family, my lady." He turned then. His steps, slow and deliberate, echoed in the vast chamber, growing fainter. He walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I heard his footsteps, still, an echo, and then nothing, just the flickering black candles, the chanting figures still murmuring their ancient words, and myself, lying on the cold stone, a new skin, a new voice, a new purpose. Time became fluid. Moments stretched into what felt like eternities, then snapped back into fleeting instants. I existed. I was. But the I that was Emily, the girl who had feared for her life, that spark of independent will, it was gone, replaced, subsumed. One morning, or what passed for morning in that endless, echoing mansion, I found myself walking through the main hall again. My feet moved with a grace I hadn't possessed before, silent on the polished floors. My hair, I knew, was a shocking white,
falling like a pure, heavy curtain around my face. My eyes, they were deep, deep black. And my smile, it rested on my lips, wide, just a little too wide, unsettling, just like hers. I stopped in front of the old display room, the one with the ancient wedding photo, Alexander, and the woman. I saw it again. My gaze, now cold and steady, passed over their faces. And then I saw it. Beside their framed photograph, there was another one, an empty frame, gleaming silver, waiting for the next Madam. I raised my hand. My long, pale fingers, tipped with their sharp black nails, reached out. I gently traced the empty space in the silver frame, caressing it. It felt right, purposeful. A sense of quiet anticipation settled within me. Just then, at the far end of the hall, the massive oak front door of the mansion began to open, slowly. A sliver of bright, hopeful morning light streamed in, cutting through the mansion's perpetual shadows. And there she was, a young girl, her face etched with a familiar worry, her hand gripping a worn suitcase, so small, so lost. I smiled then, a serene, unfeeling smile, not Emily's smile. I took a slow, deliberate step towards the open door, then another. My hand, my elegantly changed hand, extended outwards, a welcoming gesture, an invitation. But inside, in the quiet, cavernous space where Emily's mind once resided, there was only an echo, a single, resonant whisper from the depths of time, a promise that cannot be broken, and eternal continuity. The voice was mine, and it was theirs.